Good afternoon, everybody. I am Mark de Bosker, Chairman of the EPRA PropTech Committee, and I would like to welcome you all to this webinar that we are organizing today. There are different interesting topics on the agenda, I think, which we want to bring to you in due course of this webinar. And in order not to waste any time, I would like to pass on the word to our moderator, who today is James Dearsley. James, if you are ready for it, you can take it over from here, and then I wish everybody a very interesting and learning webinar.
Lovely, thanks Mark. Thank you for the introduction. As Mark said, my name is James Dearsley. I am the co-founder of Unissu, which is a community-driven marketplace that connects and educates both sides of the market, the sort of the technology suppliers and the real estate organizations and associations out there together to talk about really the future of the property market and how technology is impacting that. And that really is the premise of this discussion here today, which is really a look at sort of PropTech, which, as you'll find in the presentation that I'll do later on, is only one small part of this movement, because really we're here to talk about digital transformation. And I think one of the things that we're finding at the moment really is that this present situation, and actually both myself and Andy and one of the panelists, Daniel, later on, are based in the UK, and we're now into another national lockdown. And so this COVID situation that we're finding ourselves in is really creating, I suppose, short-term challenges in some respects, but also long-term opportunities for all of us within the real estate market. And I think, and I hope that that's what this session here today will give you, which is that, and hopefully with some advice from Andy here in a few minutes about the sort of the real estate reaction in this COVID environment, and then we're looking at the technology reaction from this COVID environment, something for you to take away and understand. So, like I said, welcome to all of you who is joining us. We've got a fantastic sort of panel today. So just in terms of sort of the next 50 minutes or so, how we're going to run this, I will very shortly introduce Andy into this. Then I'm going to do a little bit in terms of looking at this sort of global and local environment that we're now currently in around this sort of technology provision. And then we're actually going to have 3 startup presentations. And I say startup. In a lot of cases, these are businesses which have established and they've proven themselves to sort of have a pretty decent business model that can start to scale. So we're going to start off with Benjamin from DeltaQ, which we'll have a sort of a 5-minute presentation there. Then we'll have Stefan from Sensoberg, and then we'll finish with Daniel from Wondrwall after that. And finally, we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A session. So from all of you out there, really and truly, the wonders of a virtual environment is that you don't have to stick your hand up and say, I want to ask a question. You can just sort of rant away and put it into the chat message. So please, at any time, we will all be online answering any questions that you might have. So please use the chat feature, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and do put any questions into there. So I'm going to stop talking on that. I'd like to introduce a long-term acquaintance of mine, Andy Pyle, who's the head of UK real estate for KPMG, who's going to talk to us a little bit about real estate and the challenging times we find ourselves in the COVID environment. So, so Andy, welcome to a new national lockdown. We're both in it together. Fortunately, I'm in my little farm building in the middle of nowhere, so it's not impacting me too much. But yeah, I know your life has changed somewhat. So hand it over to you to hear a little bit more information about it all.
Thanks, James, and hi everybody. I mean, I'm also not in a city, so I'm out in the country as well. So have a bit of open space around me, which I think makes a great deal of difference to how everybody feels. I've got a few slides to run through quickly. Roxana, would you be able to put those up on screen, please, so that, and then I'll start talking through them.
Have you got the option to screen share from yourselves there, Andy? Or?
I have, but when we tested it yesterday, because I'm on an iPad rather than my computer, the screen share isn't so great.
Perfect. Okay, doke.
Here we go. Perfect. And so Yes, if we maybe so just the front page, you maybe turn to the next page, please, Iskren. So I guess what I've tried to do here is just set out a barometer of the impact that COVID has had sector by sector. And I think this is, I think this holds pretty true across most European countries. So on the left-hand side of the chart are the subsectors that have been more stressed, and on the right-hand side, those that have been more resilient. And really, I'm defining stress and resilience around collection of rent. So, the areas that we've seen the most challenges in have been in assets used for leisure and hospitality purposes, so hotels, pubs and restaurants and event venues that during national lockdowns have been shut. So again, UK as of today, pubs and restaurants are closed. Hotels are only open for business stays. And then the other part of the market that has been the most stressed has been non-food and non-essential retail. And in those areas, the customers of the real estate industry, the occupiers, have really had a big hit to their business in terms of the cash flows that they've got, and many of them have had problems paying the rent. If we move through, we've seen some. Sorry, if you stay on that slide just for a second, please, Iskren. Flexible offices and co-working has had some elements of stress. Ditto purpose-built student accommodation, particularly during the first lockdown that we saw in the UK, where students were going home. Conventional offices, logistics and warehouses, and residential, and some more niche areas around healthcare have actually generally performed really, really well. So we've seen this big split in the market. So, and that's because real estate's driven by the needs of companies across all other sectors of the economy. So all of the macro trends that we see every day in the broader economy have a knock-on impact on the space that companies and people need over time. So now I'll just go into some of the other sectors in a little bit more depth. So if we could move to the next slide, please. And I'll talk a bit about offices. So through initial lockdowns, offices were closed, and in the UK at least, return to work plans really picked up over August and September, but then sort of plateaued. Most of the rent has actually been paid because the occupiers are continuing to work remotely. So to date, there hasn't been a massive impact, I think, on the situation financially. One of the things that we've seen, though, is that technology has been a really important factor here around enabling a COVID-safe return to the office, whether that's for accessing services or just ensuring safety and dealing with the process of getting back into the office. So my company, we have an app that we all need to basically request permission to go into an office, and then that is then used as sort of our access pass to get back in when that permission has actually been granted. One of the other concerns that I think companies have had to deal with is really lots of questions from staff and their occupiers around air quality. Probably seen in the short term, the flexible office and co-working providers have been the most stressed because their customers can move out quickly. And I think that's been exacerbated for those operators that tend to have got long-term leases rather than those that own the real estate. I think what we're going to see in the office market, though, is much more of an impact over the medium to long term. I think most businesses really recognise the value of an office for certain. So that would be collaboration, creativity, and culture. But all of the big occupiers I've been speaking to, as well as KPMG, are rethinking how they're going to use offices going forward and are looking at their real estate footprint. I think many major occupiers will look to reduce the amount of space that they occupy in central HQ type buildings, and that's going to lead to increased availability as leases expire, especially in CBD areas in big cities. And I do think we are going to see some restructuring and insolvency of flex office operators who lease rather than own their property, particularly if we get into second lockdowns in multiple jurisdictions. In the longer term, I think we're going to see a much more distributed model for offices, where people work near to home or at home for part of their week to reduce commuting. And they'll particularly do that for routine tasks and certain internal meetings where they don't need to be face-to-face. So I think we'll see an increase in demand for local flexible offices or co-working space in areas closer to where people live. We will, though, I think, see some potential for stress in office portfolios where there are significant lease breaks or expiries over the next 1 to 3 years. I think that's likely to have a bigger impact on privately owned real estate, where you typically see higher levels of debt being used versus real estate that's traded on the public markets. Should we turn to the next slide, please, Iskren? So I'll talk a bit about retail, and at a personal level, this is an area I've been very, very heavily involved with a specific situation in the UK. But we've seen, shops, restaurants, pubs and hotels closed, and many of them didn't actually reopen, even when lockdown restrictions were lowered in the UK. We're now seeing further lockdowns in the UK and other European countries, and there's a very significant shortfall of rent that's not being paid now. In the UK, the government has prevented landlords from taking legal action to collect rents from non-payers. And there's also been very little specific support, again, in the UK for the real estate sector. I think Germany and Denmark and some other countries have put in place some schemes. So over the medium term, getting back to whatever normal might look like is still unclear. How long these second lockdowns and this second wave lasts over Europe, again, unclear. But I think what is starting to happen is the retailers, again, are looking at their business and thinking about how much physical space do we need. Some retailers have actually maintained 90% or more of their turnover, even though they've had to pivot to online only. And so we think there's going to be a significant number of stores and outlets that are no longer viable without a material reduction in rent. We're already seeing in the UK an uptick in insolvencies of retailers and occupiers, and then potentially vacant property for landlords to have to deal with. And I mentioned a large situation in the UK. The largest owner of shopping centres was Into Properties. That filed for administration in June 2020, and that's what I've been working on since that time. But I do think that we're going to see further stress and distress likely, given the ongoing challenges. And over the longer term, we think there are many town centres and shopping malls are going to see higher vacancy and low levels of demand for space. And so we're going to need to repurpose and redevelop some of these assets towards other uses, whether that's healthcare or other essential services or residential. And a number of real estate investors are already bringing forward schemes to repurpose and reimagine their assets. So actually, there could be quite a dynamic environment in this space over the next few years. If we just turn to the next page, please. Finally, just another couple of sectors. So on warehouses, warehousing and logistics properties has probably been the strongest performing part of the market for the last sort of 5 years, I would say, if not longer. And what the pandemic has done is it's driven companies to want to hold greater levels of safety stock, and also there's been a need to service greater amounts of online business. All of that produces an increase in demand for warehousing space. So actually, the pandemic has probably been quite positive for warehousing and logistics properties, and I think that's going to continue because the supply chain changes and the increase in online retail, I think, is going to stick. So I think warehouses will continue to be a positive sector. We also shouldn't forget that Brexit is likely to be positive in demand for space, and I think that's potentially both near to UK ports and also ports in continental Europe. because again, friction on trade generally requires higher stock levels, which therefore means higher space. So I think this sector will continue to be a strong performing one over the next few years. And then finally, purpose-built student accommodation that has become a really important part of the market, particularly in the UK, but in other European countries too. We've seen universities moving to remote and online learning, but actually the occupancy levels have held up reasonably well for the academic year that's just started. There are still ongoing challenges that are there. The initial indication from the market is, the owners of student accommodation are likely to see a 10 to 20% reduction in revenue over sort of the current financial year. But actually, assuming there isn't a material change permanently towards online learning, again, I expect this sector will bounce back pretty strongly and again remain an important part of the market to invest in. So I think in summary, I suppose the pandemic's presented a lot of challenges for the real estate market to have to deal with. Technology is going to remain increasingly important, and I think the pandemic will drive greater adoption and engagement with technology, which is probably a good point to hand back over to James for you to talk about the next part of this webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. That was really actually interesting, because I don't know if any of you watching are the same here, but in so many occasions when I'm hearing and listening to people talk, almost the COVID is part of the presentation. It's sort of segued in. And what I really like about this now at the minute is it's actually front and center. So Andy, thank you for that. That was really appreciated in that sense. Now I am just going to see if I can work out how to do this in terms of showing my screen, which is cool. And I'm just going to go into a slightly different presentation and actually now look at it from a technology supplier perspective. So you've now seen, hopefully, from a real estate perspective as to how they're operating. And I've got some, in fact, if nobody's asking a question at the end, and I've got at least two that I want to ask you based on some of the barometers that you showed there and some of the feelings that you have as to how that's impacted. So yeah, genuinely, thank you very much for all of that. Right, I am just going to see if you guys can see my screen. Andy and Mark, perhaps you could just tell me that you can now see my.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so really, real estate's done. Technology supply now comes in next, and let's just sort of go over that and what that means for you. And this is really PropTech from a global and a local perspective. What I want to start with really is to let me just go to the next slide. Okay, one thing you've got to understand is what PropTech is. Some of you will know this already, some of you will not. But PropTech is one small part of the wider digital transformation of the property industry. PropTech is a really terrible little marketing term which we started probably about 8 or 9 years ago because we were annoyed at the Americans for having retech, which didn't make sense to anybody, which was real estate technology. And so us Europeans said, well, we should create PropTech because it means more. That's all it is. It was a marketing term. What's really happening is digital transformation, and really COVID has accelerated that. And I often talk about it having the reset button pressed. And in developed economies, we were already getting there in terms of a mentality shift, but it was the developed economy or the developing economies which really, from a real estate perspective, were just nowhere near from a digital transformation space. And what happened sort of from November to April, May time was just massive global shift to reset, to say we need technology to make us work. And so that's what's happening here. We're the last, or one of the last industries to go into this, but we've suddenly had to sort of speed up really. This isn't about technology, all right? This is describing a mentality shift within the real estate industry. The technology was there 10 or 12 years ago. Now what we've got from being a consumer of and an employee or an employer of is this sense that we need to change because technology is overgrown. But it's in the data assembly, the transacting and the design of both buildings, but also on a much grander scale on the city side of this. And it's almost irrespective of what Andy was saying there about there is this shift and this movement from sort of the CBDs area and out. Actually, that, in my mind, gives cities an opportunity to actually develop again. Because at the moment, there's this massive threat of actually upsetting the CBD because of technological innovation and what we're doing with it all. But actually, if that pressure is released by this dispersion of people away, it may give our cities an opportunity to really rethink the way that they are designing. And I'm going to use a term here from how Google expresses it, from the internet up. When they were looking at building brand new cities out in Toronto, which sadly got postponed for various different reasons, they talked about building new cities from the internet up. My suggestion here is, if the pressure on cities is dispersing, there's now a really interesting and opportunistic moment to say, right, let's rethink how we can sort of rebuild. So back in 2017, PropTech was thought of as quite simplistic. This is taken from an Oxford University report, probably the first and the seminal report, which was PropTech, FinTech meets in the middle a little bit, shared economy comes in, and really it was too primitive. And I had the great pleasure of disagreeing with the professor who put this together and saying, you're really not thinking this correctly. And actually it was he and I who put that definition together. But we've also then got to look at now, how does PropTech and the property industry come together? And we've put a sort of a much more complex model together, which takes on some of what Oxford did originally and say, well, yeah, PropTech is there, and there's a FinTech symbiosis. It works very closely together, FinTech and PropTech. And actually, by the way, in this current market, that symbiotic relationship between the property world and the financial world is getting ever closer. But also the construction tech sector is obviously an important component of that. But then, as you can see all around this sort of thing, there's things like retail technology, safety technology, legal tech, mortgage tech, regulatory tech, environment and energy technology. This is why the property industry is so vast and so difficult to comprehend and understand, because it impacts so much of our lives. I think we spend something like 70 or 80% of our time within a building. And as a consequence, all of these ancillary technologies have an impact on what we're doing. And that's why it's one of the most fascinating industries, for example, the venture capitalist world, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail later on. But just to sort of give you an idea of size, as I said, Unissu, essentially, we're just this great big sort of community marketplace for all of these solutions that you can come and have a check out. There's over 8,000 of these businesses globally. And to sort of look at it from a European perspective, we're tracking over 3,600 different companies here in Europe, of which the lion's share is out of the sort of the UK, with close to 1,000 different companies we're analysing. And then you've got the likes of Germany at 342, France at 530, Switzerland, interesting, just over 200, but a lot of that is actually blockchain-based companies, which Switzerland has a natural home. But if you're particularly interested in, for example, energy technology and sustainability, look at markets like Holland and Germany as very good indicators of that. If you're interested in construction technology, look at the Nordics, because again, around the sort of building information modeling and things like that, that's where they're centered. But the Europe is a really interesting hub for all PropTech related things. And if you sort of break that down in terms of the focus, there is a bias towards the residential versus the commercial, and there's definitely a bias around the sort of the B2B marketplaces than sort of the B2C side. And you'll often find that the B2C is much more funded because it needs more money into it, but the B2B is more commonplace than anything else. Breaking that down and comparing it sort of us against the world, North America, just sort of close to 2,300 companies. America has always been seen as the sort of the driver of it all. It's not. It used to be, but we've really, as a European market, have really taken sort of control of all of that. And the Asian market is probably the most hidden. There's only 800 or so companies over there, with the sort of the lion's share coming from India, which, by the way, if you're looking at where the next innovations are going to come from, for me, you've got to really have a close look at India. I know from all of my close connections there that the Indian market, from a resi and a commercial space, is really driving. It's no surprise given the multiple billion people that are existing there. So keep an eye out over there over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, because I know there's a lot of venture capital funds raising an awful lot of money to basically fuel both the Indian marketplace distributing out, but also the globally based Indian population that we're finding, especially funnily enough from America, actually wanting to expand into the Asia Pac region. So expect a lot of movement in the APAC sector. City by city stuff, just for interest, again, driven really, they thought was from Americas, but it's not. The leading marketplace, much like the fintech capital of the world being London, actually the PropTech capital of the world is most definitely in London, with the likes of Berlin and Paris not far behind in terms of sort of that ecosystem of the technology suppliers that we've got. In terms of sort of actual Europe, again, this is sort of give you that little bit more information in terms of just the people on this call. If you've got your city in here, make contact with these people, because there's obviously really good ecosystems. And the surprising one here actually is Zurich. But these are certainly the centres that you want to have a sort of a good look at. Let's just have a look at from a technology perspective, though, rather than just numbers. Let's look at application. So the previous sort of 10 years up until 2018, there was an interesting sort of push around data analytics and big data. All right, so if you're looking at this, sort of over 35% of all companies focus in on data as this sort of core attribute. And you've got the things that supply the data, like Internet of Things, smart homes sort of coming in here. And if you then look to the next sort of 2 years or the last 2 years, this has really been consolidated. But now we've got all of these big data firms, which are still absolutely the powerhouses. If you now look at the smart buildings, smart homes, workflow management, Internet of Things, actually there's been this push of the providers of the data into the marketplace, because big data analytics can come outside of the industry to provide it to us, but smart homes, smart buildings, sensor technology, IoT comes from within our sector, and that's where we've seen a significant move in the last 2 years. Just in terms of funding, to sort of carry on the narrative from Andy, there has been a massive hit in the last couple of years. You can see that transaction volumes in terms of the number of deals done have actually dropped quite considerably. Investment figures this year will be around probably about 9 to 10 billion, so quite a significant drop, and possibly the lowest amount of money raised for some time, which does show that we have been impacted. And I am getting a bit of a narrative out there at the minute, which is venture funds are quite scared of investing because they're worried about the property sector as a whole, whereas things like education tech and fintech are actually getting a lot more investment coming in because of the societal demands that we're starting to see. So expect less, I think, invested in the smaller scale companies, but actually more in the larger scale established businesses which have got a proven business model. So what we're already seeing, and I don't think I've actually shown this here, but the median and the average values of investment is definitely skyrocketing at the moment in terms of established businesses going in there. Same sort of figures really in the funding in Europe. It's going to be probably the lowest year of investment in Europe, probably since 2014, where the first time it ever hit $1 billion. So we're certainly seeing Europe really dried up, especially around the deal volumes at sort of, at the moment at a quarter of what it was last year. So significant in that respect. And just some companies for you to keep out from, just from the vanity metrics of who's ever raised the most amount of money. And in this case, there's a lot of debt investment as well as venture investment, but it gives you some of the top firms, and I'll happily share this with you a little bit later on. Lastly, in terms of the COVID sign that we're sort of seeing at the moment, what we've got is this. I like to break it into two areas. We've got the attitudes in the industry from the venture capital funding side, and what we're seeing is there's a lot of sort of investment around infrastructure. When I said they're about Internet of Things, smart buildings, that's where the VC funds are investing, because they know it's the catalyst for everything else. But actually in the residential side of the market, there is an industry focus which is much more around an emotional trend. Now, that's an interesting one, and what I talk about in this sort of narrative is that the end consumer is very much looking for three core things, really. This aspect of transparency and certainty, this aspect of affordability, and this aspect of self-service and control. And what I mean by that is there are, and I don't necessarily agree with them, but I'm just talking about trends, things like iBuyers, so where people get a guaranteed sale. It might be slightly lower than market value, but there are incredibly well-funded companies globally that, for example, there's a company called Open Door that is actually going to be going through a direct listing in America using a SPAC, one of these sort of latest sort of trends that we're seeing in the money markets, because they're such a sort of a well-funded business model, and they feel that there is an opportunity here. Affordability is a global problem with people trying to get onto the housing market, and equally the generation rent side of things actually giving them a justification as to why they're renting. So watch out for the affordability side that we've got. And self-service control, definitely look around the aspects of online agency rather than selling your home through a broker or an estate agency. Around the world, that is also still happening, that we're seeing that fixed fee models are more attractive to the end user than sort of a broker model where it's variable fees and it's not really sure where it is. So that's all about self-service and control. From the commercial focus, and actually this is, by the way, it's backed up by what Andy has just said around this aspect of air quality and sensors. And by the way, I don't know if you can actually see this. I'm going to show you a live bit, because what we do with Unissu is we work with a procurement platform. So any of you in the audience there, if you're a real estate occupier who's looking for solutions, we have the procurement option there. And you can just have a look at some of these from the last few weeks, where we've got smart building solution, operational efficiencies, air quality challenge, smart building sensors for sustainability, creation, people counting, temperature, movement monitoring. You know, we're seeing live the very things that you were mentioning there a little bit earlier, Andy, which is this is what the industry is absolutely worried about at the moment, which is air quality, sensors, people counting. You know, we're seeing it all the time. But we're also looking at the digital twin technology, which backs up where the industry focus from the venture capital is, which is we need to fund infrastructure. Digital twins are a part of that. You know, if you've got a physical asset, why aren't you having a digital infrastructure of that physical asset so you can build everything on top of? And lastly, tenant experience. And tenant experience beforehand was all about, you know, giving people a great experience in the building. And to use something that Andy said earlier on, now tenant experience and some of the really well-funded businesses out there, it's about how do we make our users of our building feel secure and safe. And so tenant experience has had this massive pivot in the last few months to go from a convenience to an absolutely instrumental security and safety measure for people in buildings. So there's a really good switch, and I hope that gives you some sort of insight around that bit. Okay, I'm just going to say thank you on that. You know, as with Andy from KPMG, if you want to have a look at all of this stuff, just go to the unissu.com site and have a little play around. It's all sort of free to access, free to register, and you can really play to your heart's delight. So that's from my side. Now, once you've now sort of had that, hopefully that interest around the real estate perspectives and the technology supplier perspectives, what I'd like to now do is actually hand over to actually give you a sort of first-hand example of exactly some of these technology suppliers which are out there in the industry. So Benjamin, a sort of 5-6 minutes for you, if you wouldn't mind, about what you're doing with DeltaQ would be fantastic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I prepared here a small pitch deck. I'm just going to see. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, yeah, we can see.
Yeah, okay, also in full screen. So thank you. DeltaQ, we're a company, we're autopilot for buildings. We mainly aim for the large real estate buildings. We actually developed a machine learning technology that will act as an optimization layer above a building management system. And what we actually do is, first of all, we are gathering all the data in the building, of course. So we're gathering occupation data, we're gathering temperature sensors, we're gathering meters and so on. But we're also going to link, that's where we started, what is the impact of the outside temperature on the building? What is the impact of the occupation, type of occupation on the building? But also, what is the impact on variable energy prices, for example? So in some countries, you have when there's a high green production of wind and solar, the energy prices drop, where we can calculate and anticipate on these prices and steer the HVAC of the building accordingly. Same for CO2. I think most of you know that CO2 emissions of energy plants are sometimes high, sometimes low, depending on the green production that is being put on the energy grid. And we can also anticipate that by logging in with an API on those markets where you can actually measure in real time what the CO2 emission will be, and anticipate and steer the building accordingly to see that the building is not using using more electricity when the CO2 emissions are low, and vice versa, try to use less energy when the CO2 emissions are high, and the same for the energy prices. We also look at the inertia of the building, of course. And the second thing, I'm glad you talked about a digital twin. We are building actually unique digital models of the building that will instead use on a reactive way, start to use, steer the building on a predictive way using all those data, live weather forecast, CO2 and so on. And then at third step, we're really going to take over the control of the building. Now, this is what we've done, where we started actually, is that we're going to anticipate the building mainly on the weather impact. What is the outside? What is the impact of sun irradiation? What is the impact of outside temperature on the building? And our technology is going to decide when the optimal time is to start and stop heating, ventilation, and cooling of the building. Now, to go back to the slide, what we have done for Corona, well, during COVID and the lockdown, you have very variable moments, especially in occupation. Sometimes you have the occupation of 20%, sometimes 30%. There are European guidelines, there are local guidelines, there are multinationals who are using their own guidelines in ventilation and air quality and so on, where we can actually include them in that live digital twin actually, and it will completely automate as an autopilot, use those guidelines that were brought by the government or by the client itself. To give you an example, for example, we have Ernst & Young as a client. Well, on Ernst & Young, on some days, the IT department could go to the office. On other days, the consultants could go. So every floor was heated differently based on occupation levels and so on. Buildings who were closer by to, for example, airport, we can actually calculate and anticipate the air pollution and prevent to have worse air quality than needed, and so on. So what we actually do is predictive steering, and we are using all the data inside and outside of the building. We are also using a cluster of buildings that are large clients, where we connect 5 to 20 buildings in a certain region, and we're going to use the flexibility of the grid. Use buildings with a high inertia as a sort of building battery to play with the flexibility of the grid and monetize that. Try to monetize that as well. It's also something that will come more and more in the Green Deal projects. What we have done. But so we start with HVAC. We are doing now CO2 variables, where we try to use as less CO2 energy when the CO2 emissions are high. And so on. So what are our main benefits? Well, we reduce the energy. We reduce the energy in buildings by 20 to 40%. With the demand response technology that we have, we are in 10 years, we are surely going to go to 50% of energy reduction. We increase the comfort in buildings, and we also lower the operational man hours. By applying a sort of autopilot, which will consider all the variables that can happen in large real estate portfolios. We have a dashboard, of course. One main thing where we're very strong at is that we really BMS, building management independent. On the market, you have more than 100, 200 types of building management system. They all have their own communication levels and so on. And we already have about 80% of the building management systems under control on the market in Europe. To give you one example, this is a time and comfort graph, where we are going to compare the performance of the building management system, which is the red line, and then we activate our technology, and then you can clearly see that we are improving the comfort, which results in a higher productivity of the people working in there. But we can also go further in reports in CO2. We have CO2 reports, we have Green Deal compliant reports, we have ISO 50001 report, which we all include in the dashboard, where our clients can automatically every month, every week get those dashboards out. To show you a few results, we are on the market already. We have been developing for 7 years. We're on the market for 3-4 years. We have more than 50 buildings connected. Like I said, we focus on the large real estate. We try to focus on the real estate building clusters with big real estate developers. And depending on the building, a lot of windows, old building management system, we are able to reduce the energy consumption by 20 to 40%, depending on the building. So also, every type of machine learning has no preference, so we can use it with any type of a new building, geothermal, heat nets, high inertia, low inertia. We can work with every building on the market. And this is still the last example that I want to show with the flexibility, how we're going to see that we use as less CO2 emissions as possible. and so on. So that's a bit in 5 minutes. I don't know how much time I did. I think I'm, so I don't know if there are any questions. Please do visit our website and follow our LinkedIn so you can see we are very strong at hunting European sustainable projects like the demand response and so on. Voilà. So that's what we do. Thank you.
Well done, Benjamin. Superb. And to be perfectly frank, I think if DeltaQ has actually planned your blind so that the shadow is falling only in your eye line, which I think is a brilliant way. It must obviously work. So congratulations on that and organising that. All righty, well done. Thank you for that. If you want to come off screen share. Right, I want to bring in Stefan, please, from Sensoberg. Each of these, just while Stefan's getting himself set up here, we're sort of just doing quick 5-minute, 6-minute snapshots for you, which hopefully are nice and short and snappy to give you guys a little bit more information. So, Stefan, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Let me just quickly see how I can share my screen now.
Yep, you're all good. You're all good. Just present, and then you'll be fine.
Yep. Now
yeah,
it's
but
gone.
you see the presentation modus here, which I do now.
Perfect. So if you now go to present, you'll be good.
All right, good. Well, first of all, thanks also for the nice presentation.
One thing, mate. Sorry, we're seeing PowerPoint, but we're not seeing your presentation deck. So if you just press present,
I need to get on a different screen then.
Yep.
Okay, let me try this way. Hold on. Why does it not work? We had that last time. Bildschirm monitor 2. So now you should see the whole picture, right?
You're on. Good stuff. Go for it.
Fantastic. Okay, so first of all, thanks for also the nice presentation of DeltaQ. And as always, as I see if I'm in these kind of meetings, is if you bring all the PropTechs together, we might have the perfect solution for everybody, right? Everybody has a good solution, but if you bring them together, I think we could really move something, and we should do that much more than as we actually do it at the moment. Okay, regarding Sensoberg, we digitalize all kinds of buildings, but step by step. So we are also successfully live in several projects all over Europe now. We do a lot of like more than 400,000 openings. See some of the customers on the right side. And what we expect to happen in real estate is that we are moving into all IP. So we have seen it in the telco industry like 15 years ago. So if you have a phone call today, it's all IP. And we believe that the old, let's say, standards like Modbus, BACnet, and then these kind of standards will slowly disappear and will be transferred by all IP. And that's exactly what we're working on a platform which is IP based. It's an open IoT platform. So where are the potentials for digitalization in buildings? And we have heard that before, so I don't have to go into details. It's more user-based, like the well-being, like smart home functionalities. It's space-based digitalization, which is more the analysis of usability and stuff like that, or CO2 measurement. And the building-based digitalization, which is really going into the heat steering of the heatings, similar a little bit about what DeltaQ has said before. And we are active in all these 3 areas. We have 3 verticals, which is smart living, smart work, and smart storage. They're all placed on the same platform. We always start with access control, and we have several use cases that we can use in these different verticals. And these verticals can also benefit from each other, like smart storage. When we opened up the smart storage vertical, we're now doing basements in residential buildings that can be rented out between the tenants, like a self-storage way of doing it, which is fantastic. How does it work? It's a platform, it's an IoT platform, which is then on one side, we integrate sensors and actuators in third parties, it's not from us. We integrate with big companies over there with kind of legacy systems. And on the other side, on the management side, and on the app side, we integrate with existing management companies and apps. I've mentioned some examples here. And so you can see that Sensoberg is somewhere in the middle, right? So we can be a technical platform for all these tenant experience apps and tenant experience, let's say, measurements and stuff like that. So we are sitting there in the middle, actually. And we're starting normally with a bulletproof access management system, which is by the way offline capable, which is a crucial thing. And not a lot of our competitors can do that actually. So we don't need internet. We don't need internet on the phone. We don't need internet in the building, and so on and so forth. But of course we have that as well. So we call that hybrid opening. And based on this bulletproof access management, we offer a lot of different use cases in the area of smart office and smart residentials. What you have heard before. Not all of them are coming from Sensoberg, actually. A lot of them are partner applications. So what do we need step by step? We say we normally start with access control, and then if you have access control, you have the sensor platform in the house already. Yeah? And if you have the Sensoberg platform in the house, you can either do it from scratch, from start, but also later on, a year later, half a year later, 2 years later, you can go into smart steering, and where we use then different, where our IT platform uses different technologies. We're using Z-Wave, Ocean, Bluetooth, even KNX. We can steer now wireless MBUS, and as I said before, the legacy systems. We can also integrate sensors for the smart usage. Again, we are not the company doing these kind of dashboards showing how the utilization of an office is done. This is other companies like ThinkDust or whatever, or what DeltaQ has shown before as well. We just facilitate the technology for that because we maintain the whole infrastructure of the building. So each device, each sensor for us is an IoT device in our IoT backend platform, which should ideally use everything offline, not being dependent on the internet. And we can also steer and refresh and do firmware updates on all these devices. Smart HVAC is what I said, integration with the backend systems, with the building legacy systems like BACnet and stuff like that. But that's still in the beginning because BACnet we can read out, but we cannot steer it yet. We're working on it. And of course, we can collect data with that. And the data for us, very important, belongs to the customer. It doesn't belong to us. It doesn't belong to anybody else. It always belongs to the customer because it should be useful for the customer or the building owner. So this is how the whole platform looks like, more or less. And if you see a little example on the right, on the bottom side, you see we want to talk about use cases. There are different technologies on one use case maybe, and the customer shouldn't think about the technology. The customer should think about the use case they want to achieve. And we make that happen. That's why you don't see Sensoberg, let's say, in the forefront. We are somewhere hidden behind other companies and enabling a lot of these smart, what we call smart building apps. Again, some of them we do on our own. Most of them we do with partners. You know? And that's how we see us in the PropTech market. So we are, let's say, below the water. We are the iceberg. In the iceberg, we're below the water. We're steering it. We are in the building. We are in the concrete of the building, actually. Also with devices, also our own hardware. We have some own hardware as well. And on top of that, of course, we have a front end and we have an app. But normally, others go on top of us and integrate with us, and so that we are the enablers for this. And now I want to show you how it looks like in real life. So I'll show you some real customer experience. So this is an apartment building in Berlin, for example, where we do all the smart home steering and also access control, of course. We're managing the whole platform. We're managing the whole building there, including RentSpot, which is a parcel delivery service, which we integrate as well. These are the basement sellers I told you before. It's actually coming from self-storage, but we just use that now in residential buildings. All the parking areas, elevators are in there. All of that can be steered. This is from a co-working space in Berlin. It's our lockers from the factory in Berlin. Elevator steering, we can integrate, of course, payment into that. We have a room booking system, but ours might have a better one. And we also do storage, right? So in the storage, and that goes into COVID, is you don't have to touch any door, actually. We all work with the app, right? Beside me, you have seen me in the video, but all the other ones are real customers of that same storage store, right? We integrate sensors, we can do pin opening, that's for delivery. We get notifications if the delivery is there. Customers go there, get their goods, and put them in their box. So it can be also easy with Sensoberg. So this was basically, that's basically already it, right? So as I said here, no matter what application is important to you, we take care about the technology, and that's actually what we do. And in terms of COVID, we have seen an increased amount of automatic doors, for example. So if you just enter with the app, you don't have to touch a door handle and stuff like that. That, of course, is fantastic. The same as mentioned before with DeltaQ. CO2 is a topic in terms of air coming into the offices, which we can steer. But again, the dashboards on top of that, other companies can do that, integrating with us. You know? So
Lovely. Well
yeah,
done, Stefan. I'll have to cut you up on that, I think, because we're moving in and we've got to get in. So I don't know if there's a summary slide you've got in there just for
no, it's all good.
More.
All good. So I'm ready for questions afterwards.
Lovely, superb. Well, I'm hoping we're going to have some time for questions, but at the moment we could be. But Daniel, I'm afraid the one challenge of being the last one to pitch is the fact that you've got the least amount of time. So you've got 5 minutes, and I'd go for it. No pressure, by the way. It's 5 minutes, succinct, and go for it.
No problem at all. I take it you can see my screen.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Globally, humanity faces the biggest challenge that we've ever faced. At the end of the day, it's definitely not COVID, but we face climate change. Climate change is. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, it's all good. I would just go onto the presentation, press presentation mode, and then you'll be good.
Presentation mode.
Yeah,
that's good. Okay? Perfect. Yeah, climate change, the biggest challenge that we face. Wondrwall is a technology company, but we're dedicated to changing the way we live and how we use energy. Our vision is to make every home in the world ecologically sustainable. We use technology and renewable energy to create ultra-efficient net zero homes to power a brighter future. We actually started out back in 2014. We actually started out as a home automation business, but a home automation business based on intelligence. We didn't find going to your mobile and controlling the home really that intelligent. Our vision was what we wanted to do was give the home a brain and the intelligence for it to control itself. So we actually sat down and we said, okay, how do we actually make a home truly intelligent? And we did a big deep dive into a lot of different types of technology. One of them was autonomous vehicles. How do autonomous vehicles drive themselves? What they do is they collect a lot of sensory data, use deep learning to learn from that data, giving the car the ability to drive. So in essence, we took that philosophy and put it into a home. But one of the things we didn't want to do is add a load of different sensors into a home. So we looked at what was already in the home, and one of the most obvious things for ourselves was a light switch. So what we did is we took a light switch and we made the most advanced light switch in the world. It has 13 different sensors built into a light switch. So on average, what we're doing is putting about 130 sensors within a home. And what we're doing really is actually learning about how people live and behave, how the home performs, and actually just controlling the home for you. So the home will control all aspects of your heating. So when you walk out the door, turns your heating off, turns your lights off, puts your alarm on for you. It has a lot of other functionality. You've got a built-in alarm system. It listens for the sound of window smashing. It also listens for the sound of a smoke alarm going off. We're one of the only companies, first companies to put Amazon's Alexa technology into our hardware. So every light switch is an Amazon Alexa device. Also, one of the only companies to be fully integrated with Sonos. So this is what we started off as a business, as a home automation business based on intelligence and controlling all aspects of heating, lighting, security, safety, voice control, and music. What we found quite quickly is that with our customers being house builders, housing associations, and councils across UK and Europe, is that with climate change, obviously the biggest issue was decarbonisation. So not being able to use gas within your homes. So we said we will go and develop an all-electric solution for you. So we developed 2 different heating technologies, electric underfloor heating and infrared technology. But actually, it's the way we control them makes them a lot more intelligent. So, for instance, we can actually schedule each individual rooms, control it from your mobile. But also, what we can do is the home can learn. For instance, if you wake up in the morning and you go from your bedroom to your bathroom and you walk out the front door, well, it'll only heat up the rooms that you spend time in. So, just being really efficient with actually how you're heating the home. We also developed a hot water cylinder which learns about how much water you're going to use. Instead of heating up 200 litres of water, if you have a shower in the morning and use 25 litres of water, it will heat up the amount of water you need rather than heating up a full cylinder. The next step obviously was to create net zero homes. We developed some battery technology, one of the biggest battery companies in the world, 6.5 kilowatt residential battery, inverter, and then we put solar on the roof. So what you have then is a home that creates its own energy, stores its own energy, and then within the home intelligently decides how to use that energy. So for instance, my home this evening will download the weather data for tomorrow. It will calculate how much energy my solar is going to generate. If it's a winter's day and we need to take more energy off the grid, we're going to download the agile tariff from the energy company, and we're going to work out the most optimum to take energy off the grid. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're going to take energy at 2 pence a kilowatt and charge a battery up. And then when the consumer gets home, he's going to use the energy either out the solar or out the battery, which is either going to be free energy or very, very cheap energy. And also what the home can do is also trade energy for you. So if you go on holiday, it's still going to do the same process, but it's going to work out the most optimum time to sell that energy back to the grid. So that's creating a full net zero home. So it's obviously very easy for across UK and Europe to build sustainable homes when they're new build. But obviously as a company, we focus massively on the social housing across UK and Europe. So what we would do as a company is we would go in, we would remove gas, we would rewire, we would insulate that home and fit a Wondrwall net zero solution. On average, that would cost between 15 and 18,000 euros. But what we'll do is we'll fund that over a period of 15 years. And then the energy savings and the maintenance savings actually pays for that asset over a period of 15 years, which gives us the ability to retrofit social housings across the world at a cost neutral basis. That just gives you a brief overview of obviously what we do as a business. So as a business, obviously affordable, scalable, integrated, intelligent, and attractive.
Look at that, you nailed it. And I just thought that was you with the phone ringing as well, which would have just basically been your alarm saying, right, you're off.
That was me playing timekeeper.
I was trying to be as efficient as I could for you.
Mark, you timed that perfectly. Well done. All right. So superb. Thank you, Daniel, Stefan, Benjamin. That was really interesting. And I hope that's given everybody on here a good insight into this. Now, while I'm talking, I'm just going to bring hopefully Idris, who's working with the PropTech House Initiative. Really important initiative around Europe. Hopefully he will be brought into this conversation now. So if Idris, you can put your video live, or if the organisers can bring him in, that'll be fantastic. And just to talk really a little bit about PropTech House, which is a European and an EU initiative, which is really there, and it speaks to one of the most important values, I think, around here, which is about collaboration and making sure that we've got everybody working together, and in this case, especially with the EU, and I think particularly for those of us who are in the UK, I think that now means we're banned from PropTech House, which is a shame. But you know, we've still got about a month and a half left, so we'll be okay.
Yes, correct. Can you hear me good?
Yeah, perfect. Welcome.
Thank you for this great introduction. So thank you as well, Iskren, of course, and EPRA team for the invitation. I will just give you a couple of information regarding PropTech House, just to be respectful of the time. But so basically, I'm indeed the co-founder of the European PropTech Association called PropTech House, and I'm here because EPRA is a partner of PropTech House. And as explained by James, our ambition really at PropTech House is to standardize the European PropTech ecosystem, which is way too fragmented. Every country, of course, has its own juridical frameworks, industry standards, culture, language, etc. But it has a stronger consequence in real estate than it can have in other verticals like finance, automotive, insurance, or other industries, because real estate is really a hyper-local business. And so as a consequence, it's really hard for French PropTech startups to export to Germany, for instance. And so in that framework, we decided to create this association to really standardize the European PropTech market and to help the European institution to create a legal framework which is adapted to PropTech. And so the first flagship action we decided to organize together with the European Commission is the European PropTech Startup and Scale-Up Awards, and EPRA is as well a partner of this initiative. And what is interesting about this is really that it's a competition aimed at identifying the most promising PropTech startups in Europe. And the three panelists, the three startups who presented today were in the top 10 actually of the previous edition. And we are about to launch the new edition next week, and EPRA can select 3 jury members. So if you are a member of EPRA and if you are interested to be part of this sourcing challenge, you can of course reach out to Iskren. And that's all I had on my plate for today.
Fantastic, Idris. Thank you so much. Like I said earlier, an really important initiative, because I'm going to pick up on you said there, Idris, about the fact that this is a global opportunity. And I think what I often talk about is a PropTech is a global solution for a local problem. And so it doesn't matter if you're in Russia or France or Germany. We can find solutions from all over the world that can help, and PropTech House are doing a vital job with that. So Idris, thank you for joining us. Okay, so we just run over sort of that hour. I haven't seen any particular questions which have come into the chat. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask one question really which was in here, and I'm hoping, Andy, if you're still here and online, I'm really particularly interested in this sort of change of operation from sort of these long leases to the flexible leases. And I do think that what we've all seen is a massive amount of publicity around the sort of the downfall of WeWork and the knock-on impact it's had on other people. And I think in light of the current situation we're in, there's obviously been a massive, again, another impact on the co-working spaces. And I noticed in your, what did you call it? Your barometer, which I thought was excellent. You sort of put that as a sort of a medium sort of sign. Sort of threat. I'm interested in your long-term perspectives around this initiative, because I'm sure that there are some operators on here which are really wondering about co-working, and they've all the co-working I've seen have been all over the world has been in central business districts.
Yep.
You mentioned about this move out and to secondary cities. So what do you think are the long-term, or the medium-term and long-term challenges and opportunities around co-working as a model?
Okay, well, so I suppose I would look at this a bit like, you know, when you said PropTech, bit of a marketing term, and actually it's part of a much bigger question, digital transformation. Co-working for me is only part of one aspect, which is really what we're going to see, I think, is a continued shift in terms of how businesses and individuals procure their space. And we are going to see more space procured on a kind of a space as a service basis, i.e. all-inclusive, probably on more flexible terms than historic long leases. But it won't necessarily be co-working space in terms of nature. It might be, you know, a big corporate setting up a project room that for a project that's going to run for a couple of years. It might be co-working. It might be people having access to suburban offices to house workers that would otherwise be commuting in from, you know, places like Clapham or Croydon into central London, and instead they'll walk or cycle to their sort of local area and sit in a suburban co-working space. So I think in the medium to long term, we're going to continue to see really an inexorable trend towards increasing the amount of space that is procured on more flexible terms than long leases. I think in the short term, you know, WeWork is an example of this. I think what I call the lease arbitrage model of leasing space from a landlord for the long term, packaging it up and selling it short term to people, that business model is highly challenged, you know, by any form of recession, and it's particularly challenged in a global pandemic. And if the nature of the space that you're providing is a sort of pack 'em in tight, you know, sort of high density model with lots of co-working space, that's a real challenge to make that COVID secure without taking an enormous amount of capacity out. So I see big challenges for kind of pure co-working product in the short term, but actually a massive opportunity for those businesses to pivot towards providing the space that occupiers need where they need it. And I think increasingly that's going to be in different locations, whether it's suburban or kind of satellite towns around cities like London. I think that you're going to see a different dynamic in cities where, you know, car commuting is much more prevalent, because I think this is about the sort of the public transport, avoiding commuting in crowded public transport, because I think people have just realised that this can really improve their quality of life if they don't do it. But if you don't go to an office, you just lose something by not being physically present with people. Some jobs you might not need to do that, you know, 2 or 3 days a week. You might only need to do that a couple of times a month. And that's where I think we're just going to see much more flexibility and much more adaptability. And, you know, big corporates have just had to pivot really, really quickly to a remote working model. And my company's no exception. You know, 200,000 people globally, 16,000 people just in the UK. And we managed to pivot almost overnight to our entire workforce working remotely, and slightly had to pinch ourselves at how successful we're able to do it. That's now meaning lots of these big organizations have realized that actually you can be a bit more agile if you just let yourselves. And so I think it's going to have a really dynamic environment.
It's almost the fear of doing something is worse than the actual doing it. And I think that's something that, that hopefully a lot of organizations have learned as we've gone. So yeah, thank you for that. And actually, Stefan and Benjamin and Daniel, if I could have brought you back in and we had longer, I'd have loved to have gone into the nub of that question that you put there, Stefan, which is if only some PropTech companies worked together more, you know, we'd create the best technology supplier out there. And that, I'm afraid to say, is actually the battle of the egos of the entrepreneurs that cannot see the opportunity of coming together and collaborating. So, you know, if we can bang some egos together and make some of these technology suppliers sometimes work together a little bit better, then I'm sure it will be better for the whole industry. Anyway, Andy,
yeah,
I want to thank you for all of your time. I was hearing that from somebody else, but Stefan, Benjamin, Daniel, thank you for great little presentations in there. Mark, I'm going to hand back to you, I think, for a final sort of word, but just to say to everybody else on here, thank you ever so much for all your time today. And Mark, back to you.
Thank you, James, for that. A very entertaining moderator, I would say. I hope everybody enjoyed this very dynamic and interesting webinar. Thank you, Andy. Special thanks also to Roxana and Iskrin, who nobody sees, but who are behind the screen, organizing all this for us and making our life actually quite simple. So thank you, Roxana and Iskrin. And last thanks to everybody who has been listening in. And thanks also to the persons who brought us some insight on their startups. Seems everything was crystal clear because I don't see any questions or hardly any questions. So thank you, everybody. Good webinar. I think we look forward to the next one, I would say.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. It was a pleasant day.